Sacramento. I'm calling in today from a closet. So apologies if there's some noises in the background. We are this afternoon meeting with the Land Access Acquisition and Ancestral Land Return Subcommittee. This is a subcommittee of the California Agricultural Land Equity Task Force. This subcommittee was formed at the task force recent meeting in August. And this is the first meeting of this subcommittee. I'm just going to run through the Zoom and participation guidelines quickly while we wait for a few more subcommittee members to join our Zoom meeting. Next slide, Tessa, if you will. Oops, sorry, I think I might have seen a little bit of a delay on my end. Can we retreat to participation guidelines? Am I stuck?
Sorry, hold on. I am back. There we go. Can you see the right slide now?
Yeah. Yes, thank you. Okay, standard participation guidelines for all of our task force meetings. We're here to share ideas and connect. We'll share the discussion space amongst ourselves. Everyone has different ideas to contribute, and everyone's really fantastic about being supportive and respectful of one another's ideas. Just a note here to stay on point, which means we're talking about ideas and issues and topics related to the land access, acquisition, and ancestral land return dimension, or umbrella, if you will. So that's where our discussion will be focused today. We'll have space, next slide, for public comments. As always, there'll be two opportunities, one at the end of the work plan discussion, and then a general public comment period before we close out, so members of the public can comment on task force business in general if interested. We have an online form that you are able to fill out, available at sgc.ca.gov/meetings-events if you're interested to share a comment and get in the discussion queue. But also it's been working really well is when we get to the public comment periods and you're a member of the public, you just raise your hand and then we know you want to jump in the discussion queue. And at that point, we can ask you to unmute yourself and share your comment with us. We have 9 members of the task force on this subcommittee, which means there's 4 task force members who are not on the subcommittee, but they do have the option to participate as general attendees. And so just as a friendly reminder for task force members joining as attendees rather than subcommittee members, you must participate in observation only mode. Next slide. So our agenda for today, we have 2 hours. We're booked until 2 p.m. If we use all of that time, great. We saved a little extra time because of the number of subcommittee members on this particular subcommittee to give us an opportunity to take a little bit of a deeper dive into this work planning discussion. What we're going to do for pretty much the full meeting is go back to the work plan that we displayed and talked through as a full task force in August and look at the sections that are relevant to this subcommittee and use that as a foundation for conversation. Give subcommittee members a chance to start to express priority topics of interest, maybe share ideas for how to further along some of these ideas and give us some information on what they think we might need to spend a little bit more time exploring. And then staff will propose some ideas on how to advance this work in between subcommittee and full task force meetings. So really working session today. And then before we close out, we'll do a quick summarization of action items and then just kind of do a casual check-in on meeting schedule and timeframe for the next meeting or meetings of subcommittees or working groups. Personal note for me, I have an overlapping meeting that begins at 1:30, so I'll need to step out at about 1:20, 1:25, and so Tessa will take over and do the summarization and walk us through general public comment if we need a little bit of extra time there. Okay, so before we go into working session, let's do a quick roll call. I see we have more members of the subcommittee who are able to log in. So thanks for your patience, everyone. Let's do a quick round of roll call. And I'm just going to go down my panelist list here. Starting with Darlene, member Darlene Franco.
I'm here.
Wonderful. Vice Chair Emily Burgueño.
Okay, hello here.
Wonderful. Member Lawrence Harlan.
Here.
Chair Nelson Hawkins.
I am here.
Member Nathaniel Brown.
Present.
Okay, and am I missing anyone that is here? I've got a small screen right now.
Oh, I think you called everyone.
Excellent. So that's 5 subcommittee members. Quorum is achieved. The 4 subcommittee members who are not present today are Ruth Dahlquist Willard, James Nakahara, Leah Schwartzman, and Doria Robinson. If at any point one of those subcommittee members is able to join the meeting, we'll call them in for the record. Okay, Tessa, may we turn it over to you to launch our discussion on the work plan?
Yes. Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here. So this meeting will follow a similar structure as the other 2 first subcommittee meetings of our other 2 new subcommittees. So some of you might recognize the flow. And what we're gonna do with the remainder of our time is do a quick review of the work plan like Megan mentioned. So you'll recognize the text that we reviewed during the August meeting with some updates that we made based on all of your feedback. We'll go over the scope of what this subcommittee is going to focus on, and then we'll have a conversation about your preferences, your priorities, what you're interested in working on specifically within this pretty broad umbrella topic. And then, talking about next steps. So how we're going to do this work, whether it's in working groups or otherwise. So that's what you can expect. To start us off, we want to share the description of land access, acquisition, and ancestral land return, which is based on the work plan framework. This is the first dimension of land equity that we outlined. So hopefully you recognize some of this language. The definition that we have for this first dimension is as written in the green text. So how an individual, entity, organization, or government gains access to land in the first place. And in this case, access is interpreted broadly to entail a range of experiences and relationships with land. So we're just putting this here kind of as a framing, as a reminder, and want to do a gut check with everybody and give a couple minutes to provide any reflections or comments. So does this feel right? Is this kind of the broadest interpretation of what this subcommittee is going to get into? Or would you add anything?
Noting for the record that member Leah Schwartzman just entered the meeting.
Great, thank you. Hi, Leah. So just taking a minute to read this definition as the framework. And it does incorporate previous recommendations and suggestions. So perhaps it's already updated to everyone's liking. Feel free to let us know, as we move along if anything occurs to you. Otherwise, we'll move on.
Yeah, I got my phone.
Everyone can mute themselves.
Pardon me. Caleb, would you mind muting the conference room?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so this is from the work plan again. This is actually 2 slides because there's so much to cover in this dimension of land equity. So what we have up here is, again, the work plan that you saw in August, plus the additions that you all suggested. And we just wanted to put this here as a reminder of the issues that you all have contributed really over the last year as related to land access, acquisition, and ancestral land return, and then some of the potential solutions that have also been referenced here and there and in various different meetings. So we're going to give you about 3 minutes to just review this slide and then 3 minutes to review the next slide silently. And what I'm requesting that you all do is just noting anything that needs to be changed or revised. But more importantly, like which specific issues or potential solutions are you most interested in working on as a member of this subcommittee? And so where are your priorities reflected in these slides and in these topics, and which are you most passionate about contributing to as a member of this subcommittee. So unless there's any questions, I'll just give you all a couple minutes of silence here to review this. And then we'll, of course, have a discussion about what you noted down in a few minutes. Okay, so 3 minutes on the clock.
Real quick, Tessa or Megan, could you clarify what the red lettering on the left?
Oh, yes. Apologies. Yeah, that's an important note. So as you all know, we have many subcommittees. The red is indicating which topics are already being addressed in some capacity by other subcommittees. So land back and rematriation. There are conversations happening in the Sustaining Natural and Cultural Resources Subcommittee about land back, in addition to the Land Use Governance and Sovereignty, that's the LUGS acronym. And so we're noting that. And then in a similar way, access to acquisition of public lands, that's been part of the conversation in the land tenure subcommittee. And we're noting that it doesn't mean we can't address it here, but we just want you to know that it is being talked about in other spaces, and that if we're going to focus on it in this subcommittee, we just want to make sure that it's like then duplicative of that other work. Thanks for that question, Nelson.
Thank you.
And when you're saying they're addressing these topics, I'm just interested in what ways. Is it just being like part of the discussion, or?
Yeah, that'll look different for different topics, especially because each subcommittee is kind of in a different place in their timeline. But so land back has been a discussion in SNCR, and then we also talked about it again in the Land Use Governance and Sovereignty Committee, and we got a little bit of direction to do some narrative case studies, for example, on land back projects to describe the projects themselves and the mechanisms that have worked. And so that's like some research that we've taken back from those subcommittees. We're going to do some research on that. We're going to draft those case studies and then share back. And so we'll probably share that information back in one of those subcommittees that you see written down on the screen. But of course, the full task force will also kind of hear that research report back in some capacity as well. So if that's, what these subcommittees are working on as far as land back goes, is there another aspect of land back or rematriation that this subcommittee wants to work on? And then in the second example you see here for the land tenure subcommittee, that subcommittee is very much kind of in the works, like defining their scope. And so I don't exactly know what the conversation around access to public lands will look like yet. And so, yeah, here we can talk about how would you want to address this topic of access to public lands, for example, and then staff will come back and do some, puzzle piecing together and merging and figuring out where it makes most sense to address which topic. Does that help? Is that clear?
Yes.
Okay. So I think for this time, no need to worry too much about the overlap, because we really just want to hear what your priorities are. And then we can do kind of the matchmaking and organizing behind the scenes. Okay, I'll give you another minute or so of silence on this slide.
Can you clarify what the term big landowners mean? I'm not sure if that means to their weight or to their, the land mass that they own is a big land mass. And because I think it's like trying to hint at like corporation landowners, maybe, or no?
Yeah, good question. I believe that's interpreted as large scale, so large acreage.
Okay.
Good question. We can definitely clarify that adjective. Note that down.
Yeah, I think it's good to maybe define like what that would like how much acreage would be on like our internal like definition. I think would be helpful. That's a good point. 100 acres, 1,000 acres, where do you draw that line?
Yeah. I know there's a lot on here. I'm gonna move to the next slide just to give you all an overview of the second half of the scope, and then we can always come back to this slide if needed.
Open to adding when it comes to the land markets section, because that
Yeah,
was
sure.
that
Yeah,
was something
Emily.
we're seeing is the land markets being, what is it called, like not led, but it's pretty much a market for corporations. It plays in their favor a lot of times. I'm not wording this correctly, if anybody can help me. But that's what I thought it was addressing right there, was with the big landowners, but I don't think that it you were talking about more of the land mass. So I would like to just address like corporation landowners, in example, Bill Gates.
Okay. Great. Yeah. And before we do move on to the next slide, if anyone wants to make any clarifications or additions like that, go right ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to clarify a little bit on the topic of land back and rematriation. So one of the things would be, let's see, so I think on the issues to address, this is more of a question for the committee. It looks like it's missing, I mean, the main issue, I don't know if we want to document it, but I don't see it, is that tribal lands were stolen. That's an issue. I don't know if we need to write it down, but then another issue would be how to return land from state, local, and federal ownership. State government, local government, and federal government, how to return that back to tribes. I think there's a enforcement legal compliance that kind of addresses it, but that's an issue that I don't know how to overcome that. Returning public land from state government, local county government, and federal government back to tribes.
Yeah, thank you for that addition. That was clear to me. Feel free to jump in.
And then some potential solutions for returning land or equivalent value would be, and I think the Ohlone tribe has it, and some other tribes throughout the U.S. have it, would be like a voluntary tax that individuals, non-tribal entities or individuals could pay to local tribes who are landless in the state of California. So for like the county of Santa Clara, the Ohlone tribes are landless, and a way for those in Silicon Valley individuals or entities to pay a land tax voluntary to tribal entities representing the Ohlone people. Another potential solution would be allowing private individuals to return land that they own back to tribes in their to tribes that have an ancestral interest in their current private property.
And when you say allow, Lawrence, how does that look? Is that incentivize or is that support in some other way?
Yeah, encourage, incentivize.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
So maybe,
Educate, outreach, all of that. Just let them know it's an option.
Oh, yes, go ahead, Darlene. Sorry, I didn't see your hand there for a
oh,
second.
I just put it up. So maybe we ask Segorite to come and give a presentation on their land tax process. It's called the Shumi Fund, which is, oh man, I forgot what Shumi means in their language. Generosity, I think, something. But anyway, it is a land tax that people in those areas have paid, and I think it's been voluntary. I don't know all the details, but maybe that is something that we could ask them to come and talk and maybe help get that set up in other areas of California. They recently received a big land tax donation of, I think it was 20 million from the Tally Foundation. But anyway, yeah, it's a very interesting concept what they have, and they are not federally recognized. They don't have land, and they have still been able to acquire and access land in different ways.
Great, thank you for all those examples.
And Tessa was at the meeting. She got to hear from them a little bit a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah. Anything else from anyone else before we go to the next slide? I will just note we can come back to this conversation and even continue to get a bit deeper. Okay, I'm gonna move us along. I'm gonna give everybody a couple minutes to review. Oops, I'm sorry. There we go. To review these last two topics, and then we can have a similar conversation and we can start looking forward a bit more.
I have a quick clarification.
Yeah,
So
go.
the Capital for Beginning and Farmer Rancher Act is a multi-year startup loan for beginning farmers. So kind of those two lines are the same concept. I don't know if that's helpful to frame.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. All right, let's open it up. Anyone have reflections on this or additions, specific issues that you're most interested in working on? If not, that's, oh, go ahead, Megan.
I was also going to offer if there's anything that pops up for you that's missing here, an issue to address, or we've got a couple of ideas for potential solutions as well, but anything that we missed in terms of issues.
Yeah. Well, I think if there's no immediate reactions, this is, the second or maybe even third time folks are looking at this. So let's move on. As we mentioned at the beginning, staff has a little bit of a proposal that we're gonna share and then solicit more of your input on. Do you want to jump in, Lawrence?
Yeah, I do. So can you go back to the first slide?
Yeah.
So I wonder if the whole land back thing should be not just its own topic, because maybe it can be the part of the each one of these different solutions, because all of these solutions are related to returning indigenous land back to indigenous people. So I wonder if the committee thinks maybe, because if you go to the second slide, the succession planning, that's what I was talking about as far as, in my opinion, if there's any type of succession and connect, sellers or funding or succession, if somebody wanted to will their land to somebody, I think native tribes should be kind of the first option for those individuals. If someone's going to give their land away, I think they should have the option to give it to native tribes first. But so going back to my first point, do we want to make land, returning land, ancestral land, its own topic, or do we want to make it a solution, put it in each one of these solutions?
Yeah, thanks for that suggested framing. I just want to let anyone respond.
I do feel like there is a solution in itself of like, I'm not exactly sure how this works, but I mean, treating a land back situation like that, where an owner wants to give land back to the native and like local tribe, would that be a way to is there a way to get like tax exemption for a transfer like that? And that would be, I guess the incentive for the land seller, and incentive for the whoever it would be getting transferred to, obviously getting it versus, having to go through a market, but not necessarily the only option, but I feel like that is a really good solution, is being able to make a land back transfer tax exempt.
Yeah, thanks for that addition, Nate. Nathaniel, this is a good time to mention, so in this land succession context, Grants and Resources Subcommittee is here because they specifically noted wanting to look at tax incentives in the context of land succession. So if that's something that Nathaniel or someone else in this subcommittee is interested in looking at and pursuing, we can always create working groups, across subcommittees. So that's another really, like easy point of overlap. So thanks for that suggestion. And
I think
yeah, go ahead.
it's good to keep as a topic because as well as a solution, because the difference between land acquisition when folks are talking about selling back to the offering that first rights of refusal, if they choose to sell their land, then offering it to the local home community or homeland community there, whichever tribal nation that may be. And then, that's land acquisition. And then there's land back where it's giving it back without, attaching any type of number, without charging or anything like that.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a good distinction as far as definitions go and as far as why we have so many different words as part of the title of this subcommittee, because there is a real distinction and difference. So, okay, that's noted. I think these ideas are all compatible. We can both integrate land back concepts as a solution into each topic and also keep it as a single topic on its own.
Yeah, because it won't be a solution for all, it is, the most recommended maybe solution that I give is always land back, when we're talking about land anyway. But for some folks, it may not be a solution or a reality. They can't give the land back. They have to, sell it back.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to move on to the next slide here just to provide a bit more framing to this discussion. So we'll kind of, we'll get back to the discussion we were just having, but some of you who are not in other subcommittees have not yet heard this overview. So I do want to provide it and just share a little bit about forward-looking about where we're going over the next few months. And hopefully that helps all of us here structure, well, all of you here structure your ideas about the topics you're most interested in working on and your capacity and the timeline. So as far as the next few months, we just want to share a little update about the timeline that we're working with. So if you actually look down to the deadlines section on this slide, you'll see that, and I'm working backwards to forward here. So you'll see that February 2025, like 4 months, 5 months, we are aiming to have a discussion at that February quarterly task force meeting of a preliminary draft of the task force's recommendations. So in order to get there, we need to hear from all the subcommittees and all the task force members about your initial ideas and recommendations, potential solutions that you want to see in that first draft. And so these next 3 or 4 months is our time within subcommittees and within working groups to really get clear on the scope of priorities that you all care about most and that you want to make sure are included. And then that'll, happen by also providing an interim update in the November task force meeting. So for some reason, my brain just wanted to go reverse chronological order. I hope you all tracked that, but essentially we're here at the end of September and we're, looking forward to try and think about what working groups need to be created and what activities need to take place over the next 2 or 3, 4 months in order for you all to be able to get clear on the scope of your recommendations. And so, it's just a preliminary draft in February. Of course, there will be time to add and continue iterating, but that's the general framework that we're working with. So in that context, staff put together just a draft kind of proposed work plan, which is at the top of this slide. And based on a bit of synthesis from the slides that we were just talking about, so this dimension of the work plan, we are proposing these 3 work groups, just kind of as a starting place. And so, you know, even just these 3 topics on their own can be really big. There's, you know, the option to even create 2 working groups around each topic. It really just depends on what folks care about most and what you all are interested in. And so before I move this conversation back to the task force members, I just want to say a couple of things about what working groups are to remind you all of kind of like the capabilities and how you can work together outside of the subcommittee. So essentially what a work group is 2 task force members maximum. It's 1 to 2 task force members working on any specific topic. And the goal there is to really be able to pick a specific topic and go deeper. And so do a little bit of exploration, either as an individual, yourself, or you and another fellow task force member to really explore a topic in depth and start drafting some ideas and suggested recommendations or solutions around that topic. And so there's a lot of flexibility around how you can do that because you're working as a subgroup of this subcommittee, you're working as a working group, which is not guided by Bagley-Keene in the same way that a subcommittee meeting or a quarterly task force meeting is. And so you can work in a shared Google Doc as long as just the 2 of you have access to that Google Doc. You could have phone calls together, you could have Zoom calls together, and staff is here to really support you in that work. And we can either be present, you know, for those calls and for that work or not. It's really up to you. You can individually do work on your own and you can come back together to kind of put your heads together and discuss ideas. And so there's a lot of flexibility, like I said, and what essentially happens after that work takes place in a working group is that you bring back what you thought about, what you researched, what you learned to this subcommittee or to the larger task force. So you're essentially just bringing it back to the task force in a public space. So I'm going to pause. Any questions about that model or about the possibilities there? Great. Okay. So I described all that because essentially the idea here is, since the subcommittee is both large in number of task force members and also in scope, the idea here is that over the next few months, you all will break up into working groups and do a little bit of a deeper exploration of the topics that are most important to you. So again, yeah, just kind of wanting to kick it back to you all again to share, you know, additional priorities that you haven't already mentioned, or share more detail about a specific topic. Which direction do you want to explore? Who do you need to hear from in order to really understand that topic in a deeper way? And if those topics that are most important to you fit into one of these working groups, that's great. Otherwise, we can create additional working groups. Go ahead, Emily, jump in.
I just wanted to ask if you can share more about the first working group and what does that all, I understand the other 2, but I'm unclear about the first one.
Yeah, so so 2-part answer. I have like a bit of a definition that we've come up with, and I think we had shared in the briefing materials, I believe, but also it's up to you all. So if you join a succession planning working group, you can really define the scope of what it is that you're looking at. But for the succession planning, we had noted down that this would be a space to explore pathways for supporting and facilitating equity-focused succession planning and land transfers. So that's really general. I'm not sure that necessarily answers your question.
Not really.
So if you're interested in looking at succession planning, I think the format of this discussion here can actually be reversed. So someone can jump in and say, I want to work on succession planning, and this is the exact part of that topic that I want to look at.
So is it the acquisition process that's going to be addressed, or I still don't understand.
I guess it would be like strategies to facilitate succession planning. And I think succession planning can happen in a lot of different contexts. Yeah, and task force members, definitely other task force members, feel free to jump in with your own response.
Well, not necessarily a response, but more of like adding to the question. Is it like land, we would be focusing on like landowners and them preparing for succession, or like folks that are trying to get on the land and like pairing them to that succession? Because I feel like that's kind of the land markets and the succession planning, I guess more clarity of what's the difference there.
So well, maybe I'll just say, I already heard two topics that could fall under succession planning that you all brought up. And so one was tax exemptions for the seller or the giver. And then the concept of first right of refusal. And so if we are interested, if you as subcommittee members are interested in those solutions, or those ideas as a solution to succession planning, it's likely that we'll need more information to better understand how that can turn into a recommendation. So that could be one example of how to address succession planning. Let's, explore tax exemptions. How does that look? How do we make it happen? How do we make that recommendation?
Can you help me understand? Because I'm not getting it. What is your definition of succession planning?
Yeah, Leah, I know this was a topic of interest to you in a different subcommittee, so I don't know if you want to jump in or another staff can feel free to jump in, really whoever, but I think framing it in different words than I'm using is probably going to be useful.
Well, I think it's an interesting conversation too, to get to the bottom of how we are going to approach the topic of succession planning. And I'm also curious about how the different like working groups are going to work together. Like I would hate to be repeating work. And if I've like volunteered for one working group on succession, and then there's a working group on succession and in another subcommittee, like how those are going to intersect, and do I have to volunteer for both of them? And I think that it can be a pretty wide ranging topic. And I think that it means different things in different contexts to different people too. So like in my world, when I'm talking about succession and transition planning, I'm specifically talking about the way the mechanisms and the facilitation of transferring land and business from one farm operator to another farm operator as successfully and smoothly as possible while maintaining familial and business relationships. But I think that in this context, it could also just mean regular non-operating landowners, like having the opportunity to pass their land onto a tribal entity while having a tax exemption. So it doesn't necessarily in this context have to be that the stakeholder, landholder in this case, is a farm operator, a retiring farm operator. So I think to not answer your question, Emily, is that possibly coming up with some parameters so we're not just like all over the place would be one of the first things to do in this working group.
Yeah, Nathaniel, and then Darla.
Sorry, no, I just never lowered my hand.
Go ahead, Darwin.
Okay, so when I think of the land transfers, when I seen this on here, succession planning, I was thinking back to some of the visiting farmers that we had at the last meeting, and they were talking about their farms, but they didn't really have any family. A couple of them didn't have family that wanted to continue running the farms. So I was thinking this would be like helping them plan what to do with their farmland. And these are smaller farmers. and we're not even talking about the larger farmers, but it could be families not wanting to continue the farming business. So what do they do with their land? Do they just outright sell it, or do we introduce them to other opportunities like land back, like donations, or whatever that may be? And then with the larger farmers who are maybe their land is, they've depleted it so much and it's not worth anything to them, offering them opportunities to provide the land to entities or people that would love the land back to health, especially like, native people, but, people that may want to um, reinvigorate the land so that it can be farmed again if that's their choice. So that's how I seen succession planning, is showing other opportunities of what to do when the current farmers are no longer farming.
Yeah, great. Thank you for sharing that. So in that context, for example, a working group focused on succession planning in this context here could outline different paths to succession planning, and we could outline different scenarios and maybe come up with a menu of different options or potential forms of support that could help landowners or landholders move that land into other hands. So that could be, one scope of a succession planning working group. And to Leah's question about, or your concern, Leah, about not wanting to be on two different succession planning working groups, we're going to get really clear, like I said, behind the scenes about the scope of each working group that has formed out of every subcommittee, and ensure that, we're talking at least through the staff to make sure that folks are not doing the same work as other working groups. So maybe let's put a pin in that succession planning topic. And
I just
Oh.
summarize that one
sure,
quickly.
yeah, please.
We heard a couple of different perspectives or descriptions of what succession planning might be, not necessarily a clear definition for the term, but I think that the proposal is for people interested in this concept to maybe define what succession planning means in this context for them before then they move forward with further describing issues to address and possible recommendations or pathways forward. Does that feel accurate? I don't know that we're going to get to a definitive definition necessarily of succession planning today, but we did hear that that's an important component of this conversation. Sean, you want to clarify or add to that, please?
Thanks, Megan. Yeah, I just wanted to just step back a little, and in part response to your initial question, Emily, too, that we're here as staff to facilitate the conversation between subcommittee members, and this is our attempt at taking what have been some really broad and wide-reaching conversations over the last year now, and to work these into some sort of format that we can move forward towards the development of the recommendation. So identifying some perhaps somewhat arbitrary buckets to group different aspects of the conversation in, and so we can start to move that work forward. And we as staff have identified succession planning in this context as one of those potential areas of focus. But that may not be the right area of focus too for this working group. So I just wanted to say this, to highlight here, this is a proposed subcommittee work plan. It's not a final subcommittee work plan. We're bringing it to you today for your input and discussion. And so if you're feeling that it's not quite right, we really welcome that feedback. But it sees, even in the conversation we've had here, quite a few of you have raised different ways we could be interpreting that, and potentially different areas of focus that could differentiate what we're discussing in this subcommittee from the land tenure subcommittee, for example. So again, we're here to facilitate and really welcome your input and feedback on what we're proposing today. Thanks.
Thanks, Sean. Go ahead and jump in, Nelson.
Yeah, I'm really interested in joining the working group for succession. Just looking at our, potential solutions and the issues that were laid out in the work plan. But this conversation, like, is definitely opening up and it's becoming more robust and going deeper into what it means for succession planning. And for me, as I'm hearing everybody and as I'm also thinking about what this means to me, also, I think the term planning that is where I'm getting hung up on. It's like succession makes sense for me. I mean, in a very simple way, it's like transferring land is kind of how I look at it. I know it's deeper than that, but I think maybe the word planning is maybe limiting the conversation. Maybe something like succession strategies or facilitating I don't know if that's going to be the right term, but I feel like it's more than just planning around succession and is really what we need to have the policy recommendations is like to make a succession um seamless, right? Because we're entering into a time where the largest land transfer and the largest wealth transfer in history, as people say, is happening right now. We're in the early stages of it. Hundreds of millions of acres are expected to transfer hands throughout, the United States, as it's called. So I think it's really important for like that. That's what's on my heart and what's I'm focusing on is like how can we get ahead and really create a seamless transfer of that land that, aging farmers or aging landowners, like how can we make that equitable also? Because 98% of the farmland is owned by white men, mostly over the age of 70. So how how do we facilitate that transfer to young, beginning, indigenous, ancestral lands? Like I see a lot of, and I appreciate what Lawrence brought up earlier about the land back and ancestral rematriation is like it's woven into a lot of these different topics, and can be, and should be included, I think, also in all these different topics. But all those different layers are all a part of like succession, right? And so I'm just really thinking about this big land transfer that we're in the early stages of. And so that was my long-winded kind of like reflection of I think it's more than just planning. I think it's more of like strategizing around succession. But we might have a better term for that. I don't know.
That's great. Thank you, Nelson. Anyone want to respond to Nelson or share perhaps other topics that you noted down or other potential solutions you're interested in from those first couple slides?
I I'll say I'm as we're talking about this, I'm getting I guess torn and confused, pulled in two different directions because what Nelson said about the succession strategizing and making sure that it's not on this like one-off case and that there's more of like a strategy that can be more applicable to these different in looking at smaller beginning farmers and indigenous um, tribes and organizations that are trying to receive that land and strategizing towards that. But I also felt like the land market piece is kind of like that and like making sure that those farmers are also able to like reach that point of succession. So to me, I'm still feeling like succession is talking with the landowners and or like preparing to talk to the landowners, strategizing to talk to the landowners, while the land market is like uh, also that, but also like strategizing how these land markets could be designed to better make that transfer. So that's once that succession plan is being done, we have those land markets. So I don't know that that was helpful, but I just kind of wanted to share that crossover that is very apparent, you know, in all the different subcommittees or working groups of the subcommittees. So yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Nathaniel. I think that's a really good point, right? All of these issues are very tightly related and can be complementary. You're also reminding me that perhaps it'll be useful to just share a couple of reminders about what valuation and then land back we're referring to in the context of wanting your input on that and updates. So for valuation, this is looking at the land market question. This is a place where task force members can think about the ways that land is bought and sold. So that's the market piece. And then ways to essentially regulate that process. So I believe what Emily was pointing to earlier around corporate landowners. And so perhaps addressing the way that I believe you said markets play in their favor. So that could be a topic to explore more in this working group. We also had written down exploring mechanisms and models that make land more financially accessible. So that could look like a number of different strategies and solutions. And then it's also been brought up that it might be useful to hear from real estate experts or practitioners who, you know, work in the quote unquote land market on a daily basis. So those are some ideas that could be addressed in a working group. And then the land back working group, I kind of mentioned that one earlier when we were looking at the other slides, but as I said, this could be a place to review case studies or invite presenters, perhaps from projects where land back was successful, to learn from those models and then to think about how recommendations might look to make those land back projects happen more frequently. So is anyone interested in any of those topics I just mentioned? Anyone want to add a topic that you want to create a working group around? Now would be the time to get that down. And also even there's a capacity question here. I know some of you are on other subcommittees. So even if you don't necessarily feel like you can volunteer for the working group, it still would be good to hear that you think it should exist within this subcommittee.
Also, there's a couple of subcommittee members. We have James, Doria, and Ruth who are not able to join us today. So we will follow up with them after the meeting to test their interest in joining any of the working groups that you all decide to form today.
Yeah, good point.
Was there a limit on the number of folks for each group?
Yeah, so the working groups need to have 2 people max. However, if there are, say, 3 or 4 or 5 people who are interested in the succession planning topic, we can make 2 different scopes. So it's like succession planning group number 1, succession planning group number 2, and we just make sure that each one addresses a different set of ideas.
I'm curious how many times we might plan on meeting as a subcommittee, just to understand whether we need space for more working groups. I know I'm personally feel a little overextended on the number of meetings I have right now, so I'm like hesitant to add working groups, but it feels like we need to spend some significant time and potentially bring in some specialists to talk about each of those subject areas within this subcommittee. So I'm just wondering, like, do we have ample time for that, or do we need to create a working group to deepen that exploration?
That's
I'm just gonna say
Good.
that I am really concerned about scheduling with everyone, especially given the number of people involved in this particular subcommittee. 9 folks, very challenging to schedule with on the in-between. And if we're aiming at January for kind of an outline of ideas for recommendations, then breaking up into working groups is an efficient way to do that. So say, I see you on my screen. So say Leah and Lawrence both want to participate in succession planning. I'm just saying that because it's the first one there too. You're a working group and there's only 2 of you. So you can have conversations and work collaboratively offline without us having to schedule something and agendize it 10 days in advance and then do public streaming, like live streaming. So Lawrence could call up Leah, on his drive home and say, I've got this idea. What do you think about succession planning? And then they could jot down some notes in a collaborative Google document. You could do some work offline on the in-between that you wouldn't be confined to these giant scheduling limitations. And you can even, if you wanted to consult experts, I mean, you all are experts, which is why you're task force members. But if you wanted to bring in other folks, or you're like, oh, I have a contact who can help with this question we have around taxes or something, make those phone calls, have conversations within your working group, and then bring them back to the full subcommittee for further exploration. I think the hope is that we can break off into working groups to start to advance some of these ideas. You've already got a little bit of a framework to work from in terms of outlining issues to address and then possible solutions. But as you roll up your sleeves and really start to unpack these things, you're going to think of more solutions and you're going to think of better ways to articulate the issues that you want to address. So do some of that in smaller groups of 1 or 2 people, and then come back together as a subcommittee. Likely at this point, since we're at the end of September, we probably would want to do that the last week of October or first week of November to exchange ideas, like updates, what's everyone been working on, and then plan for your report out at the November 13th, 14th task force meeting.
Can I ask a clarifying question? For these subcommittees, we were developed through motion by the board or the task force, excuse me. So we don't need any type of motion. And I'm on other subcommittees, so I don't know why it's just coming to me to ask this question, but it is for some reason that we don't need a motion to develop the working groups. We can develop them without a motion or any votes within the dialogue in the subcommittees.
I believe that's correct.
Yeah, it's kind of just like an administrative structure. So we can indeed create those without a vote or a formal action. And I will say too, we are encouraging everyone to join a working group. Well, if you have capacity, if you have interest, it'd be great for you all to join a working group. To Megan's point, that is where we're anticipating the work getting done and moving forward, just so we, can try to limit full subcommittee meetings to the extent possible, given the number of subcommittees that we have. So just another note on what you can think about doing in those working groups. You can define the scope of what's important about a specific topic. So you could say, you could just write a bullet point list on succession planning and share with staff. This is what comes to mind that's really important about succession planning to me. And it doesn't mean you necessarily need to have the answers or need to have the research behind it. It's really a structure where you all are kind of brainstorming and moving the ideas forward. And then speakers can come out of that work, or staff can help with a little bit of research here and there. So I just wanted to say that you don't need to have the answers in order to join a working group. Do you want to
go in? Yeah. Just to kind of get it going, I'm interested Capacity might be limited right now, but we'll have more capacity over the, winter time. But I am interested in joining a working group around succession, specifically around the facilitation of like landowners to beginning farmers or land seekers in an equitable way. However we want to like frame that, but yeah, something along those lines could be the scope that I could focus on.
Great, thank you, Nelson. And I'm just gonna note succession strategies, perhaps is the name of the working group that you're in.
I like that. I think like land, especially when it comes to, this came to mind too, is like thinking about who's going to read these policy recommendations at the end. You know, legislators and stuff like that. Like they may not know what succession means, so I think it might be important to note like land succession strategies, just so that it's clear. Like we're talking about, not like succession of like anything else. That's just what came to mind. I don't know if it really is that important to note.
Thank you. Lawrence, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I'm interested in not necessarily like the land back as like a working group. That's too big of a topic, but I'm more interested in returning maybe having a working group that's focused on returning ancestral land from public ownership to tribes. That aspect of it.
Yeah, I was about to say, wasn't that land back though? Land return?
Well, personally, I think I'm not really familiar with land back. I know it's like, yeah, so I don't know.
Well, I think it's actually useful to, in this case, note the public lands piece of it, because those strategies to return public lands could very well look different than returning private land. So that's the distinction I'm hearing.
Yeah.
I was going to make a recommendation for a working group that focused on public lands. So that could be interesting.
So separate from what Lawrence had just mentioned, or kind of like yeah, can you say more, Leah, about?
No, I think it certainly could be one and the same, just a public lands focused working group that addressed kind of the barriers, challenges, and opportunities for transferring and making land that is in publicly held land accessible to farmers, public lands for public goods.
Great.
Yeah, I'd be interested in that kind of an overall view, public land, and returning the opportunities or not returning that to native tribes would be part of that. And there's other things that we could do with public land.
Great. That's very clear. Okay, so it seems like we have maybe two different ideas. Any others? Just other topics in general you want to make sure are addressed by this subcommittee.
So did you want to form that working group, Leah? I would join with you.
I think we got a yeah on that. I don't think we have to do anything else, right?
Okay, sorry, Leah. I wasn't sure that you were volunteering, so that's why I didn't say anything definitive. It's kind of just leaving that. You interested in that as well? Okay.
The public lands?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Great.
And I'm still a little bit like, remind me, I think I am in like a working group of my own on succession.
Yes.
Over in land tenure.
Currently.
So I have no problem not doing that over there and doing it over here.
Okay, noted. Yeah, I think let's definitely hear from anyone else on this call that might be interested in succession planning. And then we can work with everyone who has mentioned that as their priority to work on about how the structure will be. So whether it's a working group over there or over here, we can figure that out on the back end and update you all, of course. So we have two working groups, excuse me, that folks have expressed interest in. Nelson is interested in the land succession strategies, looking at landowners transitioning to land seekers. And then Lawrence and Leah on a public lands focused working group, with one main component being returning ancestral land from public ownership. Let's see, I'm looking back.
The other thing we could do is look at that table and the list of topics, or even just look at the list of potential issues to address or proposed solutions, and see if any of those are exciting to folks. And then someone could volunteer and say, hey, I like this concept. I want to spend the next couple of weeks, fleshing out that idea a little bit.
Yeah, let me go back. That's what I was just kind of reviewing my notes.
Okay.
But that's exactly right, Megan. So I'm also going back to the notes. So Darlene had mentioned looking at voluntary land taxes. There's an example here in the Bay Area that we could look to. Other members had mentioned tax exemptions for land sellers, and then this concept of the first right of refusal. So those are three examples, I think, of what Megan was just suggesting, and of course, many others are written up on the slide.
I will say the land markets is something I'm very interested in. Was trying to see the difference between the succession and the land markets, and yeah, I appreciate looking at this chart or table, because there are some differences, right? There are a lot of I'm thinking more the land markets, exploring policies, history, and like Nelson said, I mean, where we're at now, and like even identifying that, like a smart government would be ahead of the curve instead of like ignoring it until it gets to be a problem. But as the one of the farmer participants of this task force, I feel a little unequipped to get all that research and like just information completely, but would be happy to work on, help think that through on, what are the things that we need to be bringing up and looking at that have potential to impact the sales that we can't really control or facilitate.
Wonderful. Thank you, Nathaniel. And that's exactly the support that staff can provide, is kind of perhaps starting with what we see up here under land markets, talking about the different policies like you just mentioned, histories, and then, yeah, talking through what it is that you are most interested in including in the recommendations. So are you signing up? Do you want to be on a working group in some capacity?
Yeah, I can. And I mean, we can figure out how to go about finding, maybe just a specialist for finding what we can't figure out, and, hitting some higher level, like, history and policies, but then, focusing on like the solutions of what those look like and what kind of things we're looking for in general.
Perfect. And to that point, I think we've kind of mentioned this already, but as a working group, you can say, hey, we've heard about this person who knows a lot about this topic, and we'd love to chat with them. You know, staff can help set up an interview or a meeting. If it turns into like more of a presentation that we want to hear, we can schedule that in a different capacity and allow other task force members to listen in. So there's a lot of flexibility here as far as connecting you to the resources.
Go ahead and put me on the land back working group. I would recommend Dr. Kutcher Rise. I might be saying her name, sorry, wrong. Risling Baldy. She teaches at the Cal Poly, Humboldt.
Okay. Can you say her name again?
Dr. Kutcha, Cutcha, I believe is how it's spelled.
Great, thank you.
And then I think her last name is Risling - Baldy.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay. Is anyone interested in joining either what Nathaniel just talked about or what Emily just mentioned? Because it looks like we're kind of shaping up here with 4 potential working groups, which is great. And feels like a lot, so feels sufficient, feels like a good way to move forward.
And maybe it's worth mentioning the other subcommittees that I'm in. I did recommend doing like a Google Doc. That way, whatever working group that is can have an accessible document where they can utilize and communicate through, make notes, whatever it may be. Because like a lot of folks said on this call, I'm maxed out when it comes to meetings. Not that I can't handle any more. It's just I don't have a lot of time to add more to my schedule. So when I can, I definitely will. But I think that can be a good option to lean on is something like that.
Yeah, thanks for that, Emily. And we are using that structure per that recommendation. So if that works, you know, for all of you, we can set those up for each of these working groups. And that's kind of where we can write down, you know, the scope of what you want to work on, and you can just jot down your ideas. So it's not a public document, it's just for the working group members. Okay, I want to pause. Caleb, I don't know if there are any next steps or maybe details that you want to add, or Megan, please feel free to jump in here. I think we kind of have some clear next steps, so I just want to gut check that with everyone else. And of course, give everyone time to simmer on this and add as well. We do have more time.
Do you know when we'll be meeting next for this subcommittee? I don't know if that was in your timeline that you showed earlier.
No, it's not on the calendar yet. We
Okay.
are, given that we are anticipating subcommittee updates at the November meeting, we are tentatively planning a second subcommittee meeting before then to give all of you a time to come back together and decide what that update's going to look like.
Okay.
So I think that's up for discussion. There's also ways that we could consolidate somewhat of an update via those working group documents if this full subcommittee doesn't have capacity to meet again before the November meeting. So, okay, let's see, I'm just gonna pause again, open it back up for all of you to add any last priorities as members of this subcommittee. I do want to note, so if you're not on a working group, the structure of this subcommittee will really be to meet again, either before November or after November, depending on what we decide. And this space will be to hear back from the working groups. So the working groups will talk about what they've done over the past X number of weeks and share ideas really about the recommendations that they want to include in the report. So if you're not on a working group, that's kind of the role that you will take, which is totally fine and very helpful to hear back from working groups and to kind of workshop the ideas and solutions that they're coming up with. And then if it becomes evident that it'll be really important for this full subcommittee to hear from a single speaker, we can make that happen as well. And so that'll be probably like a topic for discussion within the working groups. Okay, so I'm going to recap. We have 4 working groups that have been created out of this conversation. The first one is on land succession strategies. That's with Nelson. The second one is on land markets. That's with Nathaniel. The third one is on public lands. That's with Leah and Lawrence. And then there's a fourth on land back. That's with Emily. And Emily, I'm realizing, I don't know if you want to say more about the scope or if we can just talk about that, via the Google Doc. Up to you.
Yeah, via Google Doc.
Okay, great. So our next steps to get those created, like we're mentioning, we're creating these Google Docs for you to work on. In the example of the public lands one, Lawrence and Leah will have access to that Google Doc, again, to add your ideas and to structure your thoughts. And then over the next few weeks and even like a couple of months, the two of you, so in this example, Leah and Lawrence will be working together on ideas, recommendations to be including in the report. You'll be working with staff in any capacity that you need. So we're here to support the structuring of that work. And then you'll come back and give a report out either to the subcommittee or to the full task force. Yes, Nathaniel.
Well, I just want to open this up because there was kind of a hard distinction between the succession plan and the valuation, like land markets. Would we want to just combine those and kind of opening that up to Nelson of I know, I mean, a lot of that planning is dealing with the market. And maybe it's just better for us to put our heads together on that versus having but yeah, didn't know.
That's up to you. The only thing I would say is that we do have 3 other subcommittee members who are not here, and we will.
Oh, true. Okay.
To see if
Gotcha.
they want to join working groups. So, yeah, Nate, if you want to join Nelson on the working group that he described, that's totally fine. But I actually think it'll be useful to keep the 2 separate.
Okay, gotcha.
Go ahead, Lawrence.
Yeah, I was going to say too, Nathaniel, because the succession planning, because the land markets evaluation will include succession planning, but not all the markets are going to have a succession planning aspect to it. So
You're right.
a lot of the markets are going to be when there is no planning and people just have, either the business just tanks and then they have to sell or somebody dies. And that's when you're going to have a market opportunity without succession planning. So in the perfect world, they would go together, but
Yeah.
But the land markings evaluation is going to have a lot of cases where there was no succession planning.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
Good distinction. Yeah, Nelson, go ahead.
And then just to add to that, kind of what I was envisioning it playing out is like not on the land market. That would be amazing. And strategies around succession. I don't know if that's possible. I don't know, but I'm just thinking like on the other side of that, like it can include it in the market, but as far as land succession, but I think I'm interested in looking at ways that we can provide that strategy outside of a market also.
Yeah, that's another clear distinction.
Yeah, that's super helpful because I was still torn and I'm like, okay, what is the real difference? But you both, you know, off the market. Like, and it would preferably be, like Nelson said, before it goes on the market or not need to go to the market. Yeah.
I have to jump off, but thank you, everybody. We'll connect soon. Take care.
Thank you, Emily. Wonderful. Thank you for that. That was clarifying and helpful. Anyone else before we move into public comment? Okay. Sean or Caleb, any reflections or anything you
I
want to
think Nelson has his hand up, Tessa.
Yeah, I have my hand up.
Sorry. I'm sorry, I didn't see that. Go
Word.
ahead.
All good.
Sure.
Yeah, this is kind of related to the working group, but more, just kind of reflecting. I got a question around the topic itself, and I definitely want to hear from our Indigenous members first. But land back, to me, how I interpret that is like it's in land return. It's like you can only return, and it can be land back if it's taken, right? Which is we're on stolen land. But we're also living in on land that has a long history of stolen bodies and stolen labor. So the topic of like land reparations for the descendants of enslaved Africans, I feel like should be included in the conversation. I noticed that we don't have that anywhere in our topics. You can correct me if I'm wrong there. But I wanted to kind of open it up and see if it would make sense to include land reparations into the land back conversation or having that separate. I know we're talking specifically in, California, and although slavery did exist in California, um, uh, you know, most of chattel slavery existed in southern states and southeast of what is, United States. So I don't, there's a lot of complexity and nuance there. And then also, there has been a task force that just completed last year on reparations in California that we could probably draw from, or I don't know. I don't want to reinvent the wheel, or if we need to just draw from that and add to it. But my question is like specifically first for Indigenous members of this subcommittee here is the feeling around adding land reparations to the land back topic itself, or is it more appropriate as a separate topic? Because this seems very exclusive to Indigenous, as it should be, but I just wanted to hear the perspectives of others first.
Go ahead, Darlene. Feel free to jump in.
Yeah, in my opinion, it should be separate because it is separate. When I think about land back and as you know, there's a lot of different interpretations, but to me, land back is more so like, for me, it's like the place where we were created. We were created here in the Valley. And when we talk about land back here, it's for the people that were created here. Yes, slavery existed in California, under the term indentured servants, which is what a lot of California natives were considered, indentured servants, which are basically slaves. But I think, yeah, I understand what you're saying with a lot of the labor being placed on the backs of a lot of, people of color, and not just Black people, yes, Black people, of course, but a lot of people of color. And so, yeah, I think it has a value, but maybe it should be separate. That's just my opinion.
Do you think it should be separate from this subcommittee? Or are you just saying it's separate than land back?
From land back.
Okay. I agree. But I agree. It is definitely separate, but I think it should be a part of this subcommittee. Like another working group for reparations. Not reinventing what the other task force did, but maybe taking a look and seeing how it fits in.
Yeah, I agree with that, because it is land equity. Definitely.
Yeah, that makes sense. I appreciate y'all's perspective on that, and working through that. Because there's, when I'm reading through the issues, and it talks about returning ancestral land, and thinking about my ancestors, like I don't necessarily know, my ancestors came through on slave ships into what is now called South Carolina, but I don't even know where where my ancestral lands are. So like, what would that mean for other people of color that are indigenous to other lands outside of what we're calling California, what we're calling the United States? And so, yeah, I think it makes sense to have a separate, if we can manage another, kind of working group around that. I think it makes sense. But I think we need to include that into our topic section, because I don't see it addressed anywhere. And of course, like land back, it can be woven into a lot of these topics also, I think. But yeah, I just want to open that up for a deeper discussion for sure. And I like what you brought up, Darlene, and like other people of color, especially California, has a rich history of inequities and injustice when it comes to agriculture, and still continues. So that needs to be a part of it also.
Yeah, thank you for sharing all of that and for the back and forth working through that. That's well noted, Nelson, to add reparations as a topic to the subcommittee's scope. And I think a couple things are relevant here to share. So one is basically on what staff are doing. One is reviewing existing recommendations from other places, including the reparations task force. And so, one option would be for us to specifically scan their recommendations for overlapping content between the subcommittee and what they did, and then bring that back here to share with you all. So we could, you could essentially direct staff to do that as a small research task. Alternatively, we could create a working group around that. And if one member wants to collaborate on that work, perhaps meeting with somebody from the reparations task force or one of the staff who are supporting that effort, that's an option. And it's kind of just a broader reminder that subcommittees can request, research or information from staff. So, yeah.
Yeah, with you saying that, I think it would be good to start with getting some information from the reparations task force first, I know they developed policy recommendations around well, they had policy solutions, and they also had compensation solutions. I thought that was interesting in their in the work and the kind of outcomes of that task force. And maybe starting there before we do any working groups, because I want to definitely hear from Doria. I definitely want to hear from other absent members here about how we want to move forward. I think starting there, the next time that this subcommittee meets, with that information will be valuable.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
We can add that to the next steps. Wonderful. I really appreciate this little bit more expansive conversation. We do have a few more minutes.
I just want to clarify on the working group that for public land. What do you have? What's the name of that?
Oh, yes, good question. So,
Because I recommend maybe we just put public land for now, and then we can define it in the working group a little further.
all right, noted.
But I think because there was I'm talking. My perspective would be my initial perspective was for native tribes, but Leah had another take, which is important. But I think we can work it out on exactly, be more specific. But I think right now we just leave it at public land. But I think it's going to encompass, it's really public land access, acquisition, and return. Is my initial thought.
Thanks, Lawrence. That's noted.
What do you think, Leah?
100%.
So we'll note it as public land working group?
Yeah.
Okay.
Got it. All right. I'm going to move us along here. We are going to have a moment to see if we have anyone in the public. Let me see. Caleb, can you actually check on that to see if there's any public members raising their hand interested in public comment? So now would be the time if we do have any audience, public members on this webinar, please feel free to raise your hand if you'd like public comment. You can do that, or you can complete the form at sgc.ca.gov/meetings-events. And I'm sorry, I can't see that part of the chat, so let me know, Caleb.
No one's raising their hand.
Okay. All right. All right, everyone. Well, we're going to end a little bit early here. Thank you for a very...
I saw 1 second.
Someone... Oh.
Lauren, you had your hand raised if you would like to speak.
Hi, everybody. My name's Lauren. I just want to express my gratitude to all the subcommittee members, as well as the staff for working on these topics. Just as a community member, I really appreciate y'all. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Lauren. Anyone else from the public?
No.
Okay. I'm not seeing anyone on the virtual form either. So I think that concludes our public comment period. And a couple reminders. So we have 2 subcommittee meetings coming up before our November in-person quarterly task force meeting. The next subcommittee meeting is the Sustaining Natural and Cultural Resources Subcommittee on October 4th. And then we have our Community Outreach Subcommittee meeting on October 7th. And then our regular task force meeting in Salinas on November 13th and 14th. And all the materials for the past 4 subcommittee meetings and the upcoming meetings are on the project website. And that concludes our land access, acquisition, and ancestral land return subcommittee meeting number 1. Thank you all so much. Chair Nelson, do you want to close us out with any words? No pressure.
On the spot.
Sorry.
No worries. Yeah, just expressing my gratitude to everybody who put forth really great ideas, going deep into each topic area today and really formalizing the work that we're going to be completing soon and to draft these initial recommendations sooner than later. It's crazy that we're coming up on a year as a full task force together, and just reflecting back on all the work that we've done together and just like the deep dives we've gone and traveled all around, all of the guest speakers, all of the experts that have shared so much inspirational and helpful experiences and information with us. So just expressing my gratitude again, first to the task force, members of the public as well that are tuned in live, and those that might view this later on. Appreciate y'all, and the work continues. So looking forward to our next meetings and getting deeper into this, into the weeds of this information.
Thanks so much, Nelson. And
Thank you, everyone.
thank you, everyone. Thanks for being here. We will follow up soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, y'all.